prior notice. He argued it's to save costs and is a gesture of goodwill to Pyongyang. But will Kim now step up and take steps towards denuclearization as promised? Or will he renege on the deal like Pyongyang did the last time the US made such a concession? We'll take a closer look at those questions later in the show. But first, we head over to our news centre, where Devon Whiting has the latest news updates at this hour. Devon?
Hi, Jong-ho. Our top story this afternoon, Kim Jong-un is on another overseas trip. Again, he's visiting one of North Korea's few remaining allies, China. It's his third trip there this year, and it's presumed he's briefing Chinese officials on his summit with President Trump. Our Kim Mo-gyun is on the line now with more details. Mo-gyun, this trip by Kim Jong-un has been officially confirmed now.
Yes, Devin. Just this morning, China's state-run CCTV reported that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is currently on a two-day visit to China. The brief report announced that 10 a.m. local time did not provide further details on Kim's purpose nor the itinerary of his trip. However, the news was sort of expected, as several reports have already hinted of the possibility of the visit. Earlier on Tuesday, sources within the aviation industry said a special plane identified as a Ukrainian Antonov 148 carrying the logo of North Korea's state airline Air Korea left Pyongyang a little before 9:30 a.m. Korea time. Japan's Nikkei newspaper also reported this morning that Kim had been preparing for a trip to China as soon as today to brief his Chinese counterpart on the Singapore summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. Kim's trip to China is the third of its kind since this year, following the ones in March and May when he met Chinese President Xi Jinping. However, at this point, it's still unknown whether the two leaders will be engaging in talks this time. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Kim Mo-gyun reporting there. Thank you for that. Now, South Korea's presidential office has also confirmed Kim Jong-un's trip to China, and in fact, it indicated that it knew ahead of time and is well informed about developments involving Pyongyang and Beijing. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun reports.
When asked whether the top office had heard about the North Korean leader's surprise visit to China, the Blue House spokesperson Kim Woo-yeom replied that Cheongwade is getting enough information about the situation between Pyongyang and Beijing thanks to South Korea's competent intelligence gathering capabilities. It was an indirect confirmation that the presidential office knew about the trip and that it is closely monitoring the developments. Those comments were made in the spokesperson's pre-lunch briefing to the press on Tuesday, shortly after the news broke that Kim was en route to China via North Korea's state airline Air Korea. The spokesman was asked what the Blue House thinks is the real intention behind Kim's visit to China, considering that the real stakeholders in the recent talks were the two Koreas and the U.S. He replied that, quote, "There is more to this than meets the eye, and that ample communication is taking place between South and North Korea, who are evaluating the recent summit through various channels and discussing future steps to take." In last week's summit statement, Kim Jong-un reaffirmed his country's commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Immediately after the summit, President Trump called South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited the Blue House a couple of days later to give President Moon a detailed briefing. This is Kim Jong-un's third trip to China in 3 months. South Korea's Blue House has taken note of Kim's unprecedented and active approach to diplomacy. It emphasized that it will continue to monitor any developments in the region and also taking appropriate actions along the way. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he will probably travel to North Korea, quote, before too terribly long, to follow up on last week's historic summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. Speaking at an event in Detroit on Monday, Secretary Pompeo admitted that a lot more work needs to be done to flesh out the details of the agreement the leaders signed on June 12th. But he hit back at critics of the deal, insisting that Kim Jong-un is serious about fully denuclearizing. South Korean officials are once again visiting the Kaesong Industrial Complex in the north to look at potential sites for an inter-Korean liaison office. They'll be making another trip there tomorrow as well. Our Oh Jung-hee has more.
A team of South Korean officials are making another trip to the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex on Tuesday. It's to check the sites where they plan to set up a joint liaison office with North Korea in the near future, as agreed at the two Koreas' high-level talks earlier this month. 17 people are making the trip, including those from South Korea's unification ministry and private sector firm Hyundai Asan, which played a key role in setting up the now suspended factory park. This is the second time South Korean officials are visiting the complex. They made a day-long trip 2 weeks ago and found that one of the buildings, the Inter-Korean Interaction and Cooperation Office, had its basement flooded. The South Korean government is looking to set up a temporary liaison office in another building, and so Tuesday's trip will look at how to renovate those two buildings in particular. The team plans to return to South Korea early Tuesday evening and make another trip north on Wednesday. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
And some major developments on the cultural front between the two Koreas. The South and North have agreed to hold an inter-Korean basketball game next month in Pyongyang and have also said yes to forming joint teams for the Asian Games in August. Park Hee-jun reports.
During inter-Korean sports talks held on Monday at the Choose village of Panmunjom, South and North Korea agreed to host a series of sports events to boost inter-Korean sports cooperation. According to Seoul's Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, the two Koreas said through a joint statement that they will host a friendly basketball game in Pyongyang. It will take place sometime between July 3rd and July 6th to commemorate the first inter-Korean agreement on unification that was reached on July 4th, 1972. The two Koreas will play another game in Seoul during the fall. This comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who is known to be a huge basketball fan, proposed holding the games during the Inter-Korean Summit in late April. The two sides have also agreed to march together at the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2018 Asian Games in Jakarta in August under the Korean unification flag, and they'll walk into the traditional Korean song, Arirang. They'll form unified teams for certain games, but they have yet to decide on what those games will be. The two Koreas also plan on creating combined teams for the Asian Pair Games along with other international sport competitions. To do so, they will coordinate with the Olympic Council of Asia and other international sports organizations. South and North Korea plan to sort out the details through the exchange of documents and will do their best to continue the momentum of sports cooperation that was sparked earlier this year prior to and during the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. As the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics helped start the process towards peace talks on the Korean Peninsula, the two Koreas are focused on carrying on that momentum to strengthen inter-Korean ties. And with a lineup of sports events for the two Koreas, sport is expected to play an even bigger role in their relations. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
And now a breaking story. An enlisted officer in the South Korean Navy has died from injuries sustained in an explosion this afternoon on a ship off the southwestern coast. According to Navy headquarters, the explosion occurred at around 12:30 p.m. on a 1,500-ton guided missile frigate called the Masan. At the time, the Masan was about 25 nautical miles off the coast of Pyongyang. The sailor, a petty officer first class, was moved to hospital by helicopter but died from serious injuries to his head. The cause of the explosion is being investigated, but officials believe it happened while sailors were dismantling 30mm rounds for firing exercises. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
It's been confirmed that Seoul and Washington will suspend the annual military drills that have been slated for August. U.S. President Trump has said in a tweet on Monday, however, the exercises can restart immediately if the denuclearization talks with North Korea break down. Park Ji-won has more.
Seoul's defense ministry announced early Tuesday morning that South Korea and the U.S. will suspend all planning as expected for the annual Freedom Guardian joint military exercises set for August. The defense ministry's statement said the decision came after close consultation between the two countries. The ministry said, however, a decision regarding other annual joint military drills, like the Key Resolve and Full Legal exercises conducted in the spring every year, hasn't been reached yet. South Korea's defense ministry spokesperson Choi Hyun-soo told reporters during Tuesday's regular press briefing that South Korea and the U.S. are closely working together to ensure the ironclad security of both countries.
South Korea and the U.S. are fully prepared, and our joint defense has complete readiness and will continue to do so.
The decision comes a matter of days after U.S. President Trump said he wanted to halt what he called war games on the peninsula, saying that they are expensive and provocative. He first made those remarks during the press conference that followed last week's summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Singapore. But Trump also stressed in a tweet sent out a day ago that the military exercises can start immediately if the denuclearization talks with the North break down. South Korea's Defense Ministry spokesperson Choi also clarified the meaning of suspension in its statement.
As we stress how the denuclearization talks with North Korea will roll out, the suspension means that the decision by the South and the U.S. will be effective as long as the denuclearization talks with Pyongyang are progressing.
The Ulchi Freedom Guardian is a large-scale joint military exercise conducted every late August for around 2 weeks. It has its origin in the Focus Lens exercise conducted by the U.S.-led UN Command in 1954 after the Korean War. In 1976, South Korea's annual Ulchi exercises and the Focus Lens were integrated to create a joint military exercise called the Ulchi Focus Lens, the name of which was changed in 2008 to Ulchi Freedom Guardian. Last year's Ulchi Freedom Guardian was held for about 11 days, involving over 17,000 U.S. and 50,000 South Korean troops. South Korea's presidential office, a Blue House spokesperson Kim Ui-kyum, meanwhile, said the decision whether to conduct the Ulchi exercises, the annual military exercise by the South Korean government, hasn't yet been made and is still being examined. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, to further look at the significance of suspending the South Korea-U.S. joint military drills, we have with us Dr Bong from the Yonsei Institute for North Korea Studies. Dr Bong, thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure.
It's now been confirmed that the Ulchi Guardian Freedom drills will be suspended. It's the first time in 28 years that they won't be happening, and that previous report we just heard explained a little bit about the history of these exercises. But can you briefly go into why these exercises, why the UFG drills are important?
It is very important military operation jointly held by the U.S. forces in South Korea and the South Korean military for the defensive purposes, especially since the 1968, January 21st, when the Blue House was raided, President's Office of South Korea was raided by North Korean commandos. 31 commandos almost approached the Blue House and in order to fulfill the mission of assassination of the top leader of South Korea. Then the South Korean government began this government-level plan to cope with national level emergency situations, which is dubbed as the Ulchi operation. And in 1976, the Ulchi operation was merged with the Focus Lens operation led by the United Nations Command. So it's a combination of a domestic military operation by the South Korean government and the U.S. military in the spirit of the Armistice Agreement since the suspension of the Korean War in 1953. And we also have a lot of other major joint military exercises such as Key Resolve, the command and control exercise usually held in the spring, and the two major joint Air Force exercises, the Max Thunder in May and the Vigilant Ace in December. So this is one of the potential series of the joint military exercises to be suspended for the purpose of giving the benefit of doubt to the North Korean leadership's promises of the denuclearization in the aftermath of the June 12th, U.S. DPRK summit meeting. But we have to remember that there is a snapback, clause in its joint decisions made by South Korean government and the U.S. government about the suspension of these military exercises. If North Korea will fail to show any genuine and verifiable actions in fulfillment of its promises for taking concrete steps toward the denuclearization, then all these military exercises will quickly resume.
How important are these kind of military exercises to the safety of South Korea and the U.S. forces in South Korea as well?
Not only for the purpose of defending the safety and lives of South Korean people residing in the southern half of the Korean Peninsula, these exercises are very important for enhancing the joint operational capability of South Korean military and the U.S. military stationing in South Korea, and potentially the mobilization of U.S. forces stationing in 4 major military bases in Japan. This is possible thanks to the United Nations command, stipulated since its involvement in the Korean War in 1950. It's not like that the whole U.S. forces are always stationing in South Korea in order to defend South Korea from external aggression. So for the purpose of facilitating the command and control by the South Korean military as a hosting forces and the augmentation of the U.S. forces, these exercises are very important and useful.
Do you think this suspension of the UFG exercises can lead to the suspension of other joint U.S.-South Korea exercises as well? I mean, if you say these military exercises as important as you say, then is it realistic that they should be suspended, or do they have to keep some of these as long as there's North Korea and South Korea are not unified?
Well, it has been the protest and the complaints issued by the North Korean government that these joint military exercises are tantamount to actual nuclear war games. So rather than lessening the tension, military tension on the Korean Peninsula, North Korean military and the government have insisted that these joint military exercises are the main causes of escalation of tension on the Korean Peninsula and driving the Korean Peninsula toward the brink of the nuclear wars. So we have to wait and see whether North Korean government will accept and respond to this decision to suspend the Ulchi Freedom Guardian exercises as first of many possible good gestures taken by jointly Seoul and Washington in parallel with North Korea taking concrete steps toward the denuclearization. If North Korea wants to lower the military tension on the Korean Peninsula and reduce the chance of unwanted nuclear warfares actually taking place on the Korean Peninsula, then the ball is already in the court of North Korea's. North Korea has to take the concrete steps toward the denuclearization. If not, then these military exercises have to carry it out in a ways that they will be designed to deal with North Korea's missile and nuclear capabilities, as well as, God forbid, North Korea's use of the WMDs and the chemical weapons.
Yes, God forbid. But North Korea have protested strongly against these kind of exercises before, for many years. But there is also a question of whether this action needed really to be taken. For example, when South Korea's National Security Advisor, Jong-un, met with Kim Jong-un, he was reportedly told by Kim Jong-un that, if I quote here, he understands the need for the routine joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. and why they must continue. Now, Jong-un informed Trump of what Kim said as well. So if this was Kim's stance, what was the need to give Kim this concession? Was Trump really only looking to save costs as he's announced after the summit on June 12th?
Well, I mean, it is clear that the President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, is very much interested in lowering the cost of the joint military exercises in the name of, helping, save the American taxpayers' money. But at the same time, it is a very important first step, first bite in the apple by the Trump administration after the Singapore summit meeting with Mr. Kim Jong-un that United States is prepared to draw a big picture with Pyongyang toward the pursuit of the joint, and common interest. With these big concessions made by Seoul and Washington, now it is Pyongyang's turn to reciprocate with a very clear sign of denuclearization. Otherwise, then the elements that North Korea has been taking issue at, the mobilization of the strategic bombers like the B-1B or B-52 that carry the nuclear weapons have to remain the same in the joint military exercises. Otherwise, then these joint military exercises will not be suspended or will remain in a very small scale to take care of the defense of South Korea.
Let's move on to some other news that's coming out today. It's been announced by Chinese state media that Kim Jong-un will be in Beijing on Tuesday and Wednesday. It's assumed, of course, that he'll meet with President Xi Jinping to brief him on his summit with President Trump last week. It's his third visit to China in as many months. What does this say about the relationship between North Korea and China right now?
I was personally surprised by this announcement that Mr. Kim Jong-un made his third visit in 3 months to Beijing, have a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. There may be a lot of different interpretations about his intentions, but one potential reason is to express his gratitude for the Chinese support for making the DPRK U.S. summit meeting in Singapore in June a huge success for North Korea, including the chartered airplane issued by the Chinese government. And second potential reason is to get kind of assurance or insurance from Beijing that if North Korea is taking some important measures to demonstrate its genuine intentions for denuclearization, such as destruction of missile test sites in Dongchangri, or potential transfer of a small number of nuclear warheads and a small amount of nuclear weapon-grade materials out of the country, then with China's support, that the United States would move ahead with lifting of economic sanctions on North Korea. Because alongside with provision of the security guarantee, what North Korea desperately needs to have is the immediate lifting of at least some of the existing economic sanctions. Otherwise, North Korea's pursuit of the second pillar of the so-called Pyongyang policy, the simultaneous pursuit of nuclear weapon development and economic development, will not be accomplished. Then the capability of Kim Jong-un leadership to control the population will be greatly diminished. So, in order to ensure China's support to eliminate at least some of the existing economic sanctions, especially the UN Security Council resolutions, such as number 2371 and 2375 and 2397, which bans the export by North Korea of 6 major items, or the importation of the refined oil from China, more than 500,000 barrels. Then North Korean economy will be continuously bleeding. So the fruit that North Korea has accomplished in the June Singapore summit meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump will not be actualized. So time is not really on the side of North Korea. North Korea has every reason to push the envelope really fast.
The timing of this announcement also is quite interesting. The previous time, 2 times that Kim went to China, the news about his visit was released after he left and returned back to Pyongyang. What do you make of this change in stance about how Kim's announcements and travels is being made public?
I think China has gained a great deal of confidence as a participant in a lot of rapid changes actually taking place on the Korean Peninsula. And by openly announcing Kim's third visit to Beijing, it seems like Chinese government wants to have the guarantee of its participation in the upcoming multilateral discussions and negotiations on announcing the end of the Korean War and potential replacing of the 1953 Armistice Agreement to a peace treaty, because it has not been officially set whether China will be definitely invited as a fourth party in the multilateral negotiations to replace the 1953 armistice agreement. And by making this open announcement, China seems to aim at demonstrating its influence on North Korea, that if China is withdrawing its support for the existing economic sanctions, then all this all-out pressure by the Trump administration on North Korea to move really fast with the denuclearization process will be deflated. So China has to be taken into account if Washington wants to achieve what it wants to achieve in the name of complete denuclearization of North Korea.
Well, thank you for your coming in as well and sharing your insights as always.
You're welcome.
That brings us to the end of our show. I'll be back same time tomorrow. But till then, stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscasts as we bring you updates from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching and goodbye for now.